My husband was secretly wearing my panties until his mom found one in his bag and asked a question. I thought I knew everything about him, every habit, every detail, until things stopped making sense. At first, I ignored it. Then I started to notice patterns, but I stayed quiet until his mother found it, right there, in his bag. She held it up, looked at me, and asked a question. One I wasn't ready to answer, because deep down, I already knew the truth. I had been carrying a quiet knowing for longer than I admitted to myself. Not a suspicion, not something I could point to and name, just a sense. The kind that lives below the level of words, in the part of you that registers things before your mind has decided what to do with them. And then his mother asked the question, gently, without accusation, looking at me over what she was holding with eyes that already knew the answer. And I realized that the hardest part was not the secret itself. It was understanding why I had already known and chosen every single day to let it stay unnamed. Have you ever known something you weren't ready to know? Leave your story in the comments, or just write "I'm here" so I know you made it to the end. If this story moved you, leave a like. It helps more people find it. There is a particular kind of knowing that is not yet knowledge. It lives below language, in the part of us that processes things before consciousness catches up. It shows up as a sensation more than a thought, a quiet tightening, a slight shift in the quality of attention when something doesn't quite match the picture we're holding. Most of us learn over the course of a life to manage this kind of knowing, to not follow it too quickly, to give it time, to wait until it organizes itself into something we can hold in our hands and examine. I had been managing mine for a long time. Longer, I think, than I let myself acknowledge until it was no longer possible not to. My husband's name is Patrick. We had been married for 9 years when any of this happened. 9 years of a life that looked, from the outside and mostly from the inside too, like the thing I had hoped it would be. We had a house we were proud of, and a routine that worked, and a genuine easiness between us that I had never taken for granted, because I had been in relationships without it, and I knew the difference. Patrick was a good man, kind in the specific, practical way that shows up in actions rather than declarations, attentive in the ways that matter, present. But there was something that moved at the edges of my understanding of him, something I caught in glimpses briefly, and then lost again before I could bring it into focus. I have tried, looking back, to identify when I first felt it, and I think it was somewhere in the 3rd year of our marriage, not triggered by any single event, but arising slowly, the way a feeling does when it has been building beneath the surface long enough. Small things had been going missing, not consistently, not in large quantities, just the occasional item, here and there, often enough that I had noticed the pattern without being able to draw any conclusion from it that felt safe to draw. I told myself I was disorganized. I told myself the laundry had an appetite. I told myself a lot of things, and I believed all of them with varying degrees of conviction, and I moved on. What I did not do, and I want to be honest about this because I think honesty is the only way to tell this story properly, was ask. In 9 years, with a quiet knowing growing in me like something planted in low light, I never asked Patrick directly. Not once. I have thought about why. There are comfortable answers and there are true ones, and they are not always the same. The comfortable answer is that I had no evidence, that I was protecting him from a question that might hurt him if I was wrong, that I was being careful and considerate. The true answer is more complicated. The true answer involves the fact that asking would have ended the state of not knowing, and not knowing, as uncomfortable as it was, had the quality of safety. As long as nothing was confirmed, the picture I had of our life remained intact. Asking was the act that would make whatever was true irrevocably true, and I was not ready for that. So I stayed quiet. Year after year, I stayed quiet. And the quiet knowing stayed with me, below the level of language, patient and unhurried, waiting. Patrick's mother is named Gloria. She is a woman of great warmth and greater perceptiveness, the kind of person who seems to collect information about the people around her without effort, who notices things in the way of people who have paid attention to others their whole lives and become very good at it. She had always been kind to me, genuinely, specifically kind, the kind that comes from actually seeing a person rather than performing the role of welcoming mother-in-law. I had come, over 9 years, to feel genuinely close to her. She visited in the spring. A long weekend. She drove up from the south, as she did 2 or 3 times a year, and stayed in the small room at the back of the house that had become, over time, understood as hers. She and Patrick had a specific quality of ease with each other that I had always found beautiful to watch, the ease of people who know each other at a level that exists before words, who move around each other's presence with the fluency of long familiarity. On the Saturday afternoon, Patrick was in the garden, and Gloria and I were in the kitchen, doing the parallel task companionship of people who are comfortable enough together to occupy the same space without having to fill it. She was making something and I was not doing very much of anything, which is the natural state of a person in the kitchen of someone who cooks with confidence. Patrick's bag was on the chair by the door. He had taken it with him to the gym that morning and left it there when he came back, which was a habit I had mildly complained about for years, and which had never changed, and which I had made peace with in the way of long marriages making peace with the unalterable. Gloria needed her phone, which she thought might be in her own bag on the same chair. She moved Patrick's bag to get to hers, and as she lifted it, the side pocket, the one that had been imperfectly zipped, came open, and something slipped out onto the chair. She set her bag down. She looked at what had come out. She picked it up. It was soft and pale. Ivory or cream. I can't be completely sure of the color now. Memory having its own imprecision. A fabric I knew. A detail along the edge that I recognized not because I specifically remembered owning it, but because it was the kind of thing I bought, the kind of detail I gravitated toward. Gloria held it in both hands, turned it slightly, the way you turn something when you are making sure you are seeing correctly. And then she looked at me, not with the alarmed expression I might have expected, not with shock, with something quieter and more considered. The look of a woman who has been paying attention for a long time and has just had a piece of something fall into place. She said gently, without any edge in it, "Is this yours?" And there it was. The question. 3 words, light and simple on the surface and fathomless underneath. A question that was also, depending on the answer, about a dozen other questions. I stood in the kitchen of my own house, and I looked at what Gloria was holding, and I felt the quiet knowing. The thing I had been managing and tending and refusing to name for years, rise up through me with a clarity that was almost physical, like light arriving in a dark room, not gently, but all at once. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "I'm not sure." It was not a lie, exactly. It was the last available position before honesty, the last small ledge before the ground. Gloria looked at me a moment longer. Her expression did not change. That specific warm perceptiveness, holding the moment without rushing it. And then she set the item down on the counter and said quietly, "I think Patrick might need someone to talk to. Not me, not you, someone." She had left the door open, rather than walking through it herself. She had offered a direction without demanding I take it immediately, which is one of the kindest things one person can do for another in a difficult moment. Patrick came in from the garden about 20 minutes later. Gloria and I had moved on, in the surface sense of things. We were talking about something else. The conversation had continued in the way of people who are managing a moment together. But when Patrick came in, with earth on his hands and a loose, comfortable quality of having been outside, and looked at us both and registered something he couldn't quite name in the quality of the room, I watched his face do the very thing I had been watching for 9 years and never quite been able to see clearly enough to name. A flicker, gone in an instant. The tiny gap between what a person is feeling and the face they present to the world. I saw it. For the first time, I saw it completely. That evening, after Gloria had gone to her room and the house had grown quiet, and Patrick and I were in the kitchen with the particular stillness of late evenings, I said, "Can I ask you something?" He looked at me over his mug. "Of course." "Have things ever been missing from my drawer? Things you might have taken?" The silence that followed was not the silence of denial. It was not the silence of a man scrambling to construct a defense. It was the silence of a man who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just been handed the possibility, tentative, unprecedented, of putting it down. He set his mug on the counter. He looked at me. "Yes," he said. One word. Complete and exhausted and, I thought, carrying something very close to relief. I nodded. I had known he would say yes. I had known, in the way of not yet knowledge, for years. Hearing it was not the shock I might have expected. It was more like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for so long I had stopped expecting it to open. He told me what he could. It came in pieces, the way things do when someone has never spoken them out loud before and is encountering, for the first time, the strange effort of giving language to an interior life that has existed only in silence. He had known about this part of himself since he was young. He had never told anyone. He had carried it through his whole life, through our marriage, managing it in small and careful ways that were never meant to be found, because finding them had always seemed, in his imagination, like the end of everything he had. He said, "I thought if you knew, you would see me as someone different. Someone other than who you married." And I thought about that. I thought about it carefully, in the way the question deserved. "I don't see you as someone different," I said. "I see you as someone more, someone I didn't have all of." He was very still. "The person I married," I said, "has been carrying something alone for 9 years. That's not a different person. That's the same person with a heavier load than I knew about." Gloria said nothing about it directly, not the next morning, not at any point during the rest of her visit. But on the Sunday, when we were all in the garden after lunch, she looked at Patrick and said, with the comfortable irrelevance of a non sequitur that was not actually a non sequitur, "You look lighter today." And Patrick looked at her. And something passed between them in the way things pass between mothers and their children. Wordless, deep, old. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." I have thought many times about Gloria's question, the simple gentleness of it. Is this yours? Not an accusation. Not a demand. Just a door, cracked open, in the direction of something true. I have also thought about the years before that question. The years of quiet knowing. The years I chose not to follow the thing I felt, because following it would have required me to be ready, and I was not ready. There is something I have had to make peace with in that, the understanding that not asking was a choice too, and that it had a cost, though perhaps not the cost I feared. The cost was not the marriage. The cost was the years Patrick spent alone with something that did not have to be carried alone. The years of management. The years of a private self with no place to go. That is the part I am still sitting with. Not with guilt. Guilt is too simple and too circular to be useful here. With something more like understanding. The understanding that readiness is not a gift that arrives. It is a choice we make, or fail to make, and the making of it matters, not only for ourselves, but for the people we love who are waiting, quietly, and without much hope, for us to make it. I made it. Later than I should have. But I made it. And the person on the other side of it, the fuller version of the man I had married, the one with a private self that now has somewhere to exist, is still here. Still kind in the specific practical way. Still present in the ways that matter. Still mine, and more mine now than he has ever been. Because he is whole, finally. And wholeness, I have learned, is not something to be afraid of. It is the only version of a person worth loving. It is the only version of a life worth building. If you made it to the end, thank you. Stay with me a moment longer and leave a comment. Tell me your story. Or just write, "I'm here." That is always enough. It has always been enough. Have you ever known something you weren't ready to know? Leave your story in the comments. Or just write, "I'm here," so I know you made it to the end.